The story begins in the year 2035. Advancements in technology led to the creation of the world of Connect. It was as realistic as the real world, with perfectly natural AI NPCs, fancy swordsmanship, and magic that players could only experience in-game. All of these elements attracted over 100 million people to the world of Connect. Later, a large group of people lay dead in front of the gate, and a man screamed in pain as daggers struck him in the body. Then, the man fell to the ground, lifeless, in front of other onlookers who were observing Bae DoHyun, with the in-game name Crash. The men called DoHyun a bastard, and one of them urged the others to charge at him since he was alone. The man also shouted that DoHyun was the enemy of the Empire, and the men charged at him together to attack. However, DoHyun calmly looked at them, and the system displayed his rank as 13th and his class as psychokinetic. One of the men aimed an arrow at him while shouting for him to die, but he simply raised his 2 fingers and deflected the arrow, decapitating the man. The leader ordered his knights to fire their arrows, which they did, and the arrows flew toward DoHyun. He raised his hand to stop the arrows from getting closer to him, leaving the knights astonished that the arrows had stopped. Then, he hurled the arrows back at the knights, prompting the leader to order his knights to dodge, but unfortunately for the others, they were hit before they could evade. DoHyun rolled the dagger in his hand and gripped it tightly. He swiftly attacked the leader with it, causing the leader's neck to bleed. Then, he approached the remaining knights, who cursed him for his psychokinetic abilities and asked about his overpowered skill. However, one of the knights was horrified when he saw something above them, noticing the weapons suspended in the air. DoHyun aimed the weapons at them, making the knight curse, knowing what would happen next. Then, he lowered his hand, releasing the weapons, which flew directly at the knights. Afterward, he walked away, leaving bloody footprints, and entered the castle, leaving a trail of dead knights outside. He easily dispatched the guards inside the castle, and as he looked around, he wondered what it was. Then, he heard someone coughing beside him, and the Pope revealed that it was the end. DoHyun simply stared at the Pope's pendant, realizing it was what he had been searching for. The Pope told him that God had foretold the coming of saviors to that world. DoHyun raised his hand to grasp the Pope's necklace, but the Pope tightly held his hand, asking him why there were only fighters there, why he had brought chaos to the world, why he had burned the cities, killed the innocents, and enslaved the people there. DoHyun just grabbed the Pope's necklace, calling the Pope an old man and telling him not to blame him but to blame the guild that had colluded with the Empire. Then, he heard footsteps outside, causing him to curse as he realized that the guild's latecomers had arrived. He ascended the stairs, with the Pope warning him not to forget that everything would unfold as God had intended, and all of them would pay for what they had done. He faced the huge box with a hole in the center and slowly placed the pendant in the hole. A magical light appeared, and when the box accepted the pendant, it revealed an underground passage. He walked down, recalling the information from the intel, but his thoughts were interrupted when he saw a book and other objects floating in the purple light. He thought these must be the very first mythical items in Connect. He knew that 5 years ago, major guilds had colluded with the Empire and destroyed the world. Everything he had done for the last 6 months had been for this, and an NPC lamenting was nothing. He understood that the major guilds now controlled Connect, and he was the only solo player left in the top 100. He placed the items inside his inventory, thinking he should take them before the others arrived, as the guilds would be very upset if they found out he had obtained them first. Then he decided to leave but noticed something on the table and wondered if it was a game cartridge. He picked it up, wondering why it was there. Suddenly, a strong pressure emanated from the game cartridge, causing him to bend his knee slightly in pain and panic. He wondered if it was a connection error and what it meant. Then, he logged out immediately. He woke up in his room and sat up abruptly when he saw a stab wound near his chest, while someone told him to stop moving. He cursed in his mind, realizing that things were going too well for him. The man, along with other suited men, asked him why he was moving so much and told him to die peacefully. This made him think that they had gone too far in the real world, and he called them pieces of trash. One of the men in the group informed their president that they had captured DoHyun and asked if he wanted them to bring him alive. When their president replied, the man said they understood. Another man asked what their president had said, and the man replied that they should kill DoHyun because their president only wanted DoHyun's head. Then the men grabbed him, telling him that he should have played at his level and asked if he thought he had something going for him just because he was good at a game and if nothing scared him after he gained some fame. He begged them not to kill him, but one of the men covered his face and raised a sharp blade to kill him. Then, the man stabbed him repeatedly, making him think that those men were crazed for killing people over a game, and he wondered if he was going to die like this. Suddenly, someone continuously called him sir in a panic, urging him to wake up. He panikedly sat up immediately in surprise. He looked at his hand in confusion and glanced around, wondering what had just happened, as he recalled dying after being stabbed. Suddenly, he heard someone in pain beside him, and the maid asked him if he was okay while addressing him as Raul. He wondered who Raul was but was more surprised to see a level status above the maid named Anna at level 3. Anna asked him if she should call a doctor because he had broken into a cold sweat. He was confused about what was happening and felt like he was witnessing something he shouldn't have been able to. Then, the system popped up a notification indicating that the soul had settled in, activating Connect's closed beta system, and he could now use the user interface. The current number of users was 1. He asked in panic if they were kidding him and realized that it meant he was inside the world of Connect. He walked onto his room balcony and realized that he could feel the wind and everything around him, which was very different from when he was linked with Crash. He knew that synchronization, the level of connection they had with Connect, determined their strength in the game. Normal players had around 30% synchronization, but he had close to 90%. He had managed to maintain his rank 1 position for 10 years until the major guilds appeared, but he understood that he no longer possessed that body. He felt unlucky because he had spent so much time leveling up that body. However, he remembered that it was a closed beta, and currently, there was only 1 user, making him wonder if he was the only one using that system in that world at the moment. He raised his hand and realized that he could still access his inventory even in the closed beta. He used his scan user's information, and the system showed that it detected locked user information and updated his data. The system rushed to provide him with the information, and he planned to use his knowledge and powers from his past life to climb to the top again. He endured the pain and saw that his current name was Raul Ashton. He was the youngest son of the Ashtons, the 5th Count of the Reuben Kingdom. Ashton County was the first to fall in Connect. He recalled that Ashton County was one of Reuben Kingdom's Orthodox families. The Count and his eldest son had suddenly died, and the second son had gone missing. A coup had occurred after the youngest son inherited the county. During those disasters, the Forbidden Area's barrier had broken, leading to a failed attempt to stop the monster invasion. Now, he realized that he was the youngest son of that family, Raul Ashton. He looked ahead and knew that the beautiful city he was seeing would be ruined in the next 3 years. He entered his room, thinking that he couldn't let it happen because he no longer had Bae DoHyun or Crash's life, meaning it was his last chance. He clenched his fist, knowing that he had suffered when he lived as Bae DoHyun. If he missed the chance to live there again, it would be too sad. He looked at the sword on the table, understanding that there was only one way to prevent the fall. He had to get stronger. He knew that a month later, Ashton Count's traditional coming-of-age ceremony would begin, and if he made it to the semi-finals, he could enter the Kingdom Academy to become stronger and protect his life. However, he suddenly collapsed on the floor, wondering why he felt so tired after just a few swings. Then, he saw that he was only at level 5, realizing that he was 2 levels behind the maid, and he knew he had to start training immediately for the upcoming tournament. A month later, the day of the tournament arrived, and he was amazed to see that many people were participating. He looked around, knowing that he had to fight against them. Then he remembered his coach telling him that it had only been 10 minutes, but he was exhausted. He thought it was due to the pain he had endured during the past month to get past the qualifiers. He glanced at the system, remembering that the last time he checked, he was at level 13, and he knew that his stamina was ready. He also had a plan for the matches, so he was confident that he would make it to the semi-finals. Suddenly, he felt an attack from behind, so he quickly avoided it, causing the attack to hit the ground instead. He was surprised to see a fist behind him, and the man apologized, saying his hand had slipped. The man called him a precious noble and asked if he was there for the tournament. He remembered that the man's name was Dion, and those men behind him were his cousins. Dion told him that he thought he would be crying in his room, but Raul remained silent. Raul realized that Dion was his cousin and that Dion had bullied him during swordsmanship training in the past. The instructor and the count had allowed it because of the family motto that trained like it was real, treating everyone as equals on the training ground, and holding no one responsible for injuries during training. This meant that Dion was just a scoundrel who bullied anyone weaker than him. Dion told him that he should withdraw while he still could and warned that it wouldn't be just one bone broken this time. He'd break every single one in Raul's body. Dion teasingly instructed his cousins to let Raul pass, predicting that Raul would cry again. Then Dion walked away laughing, leaving Raul with a determination to crush him in the finals. Later, in Ashton's castle, the butler reported to the man that he was holding the report for the tournament that day. The man ordered the butler to hand it over to him and asked if there was anyone useful. The butler was about to reply when the man was surprised by the list and asked the butler where Raul was. The butler replied that Raul had gone back to his room after finishing his meal, thinking that Raul had used up all his strength during the qualifiers. Count Melvin Ashton, Raul's father, told the butler that he could leave. When Melvin saw the butler come out, he laughed loudly and proudly, saying that Raul was his son because Raul had truly made it and reached the group stage. Melvin had never forced Raul to learn how to wield a sword because Raul was weaker than his brothers. However, Raul had started training a month before the tournament. At first, Raul would fall down after just 10 minutes, but he never gave up. Melvin knew that Raul had been bullied during training due to his weak body, but he also realized that if he helped Raul, he would be shamed for being unable to do anything without his help. So, he had waited until Raul stood up for himself, but Raul's progress had exceeded his expectations. He decided that after the finals were over, he should go see Raul. The day of the finals arrived, and the audience urged them to make it fun and stop dragging it out, encouraging them to end the match. The man cursed while wondering why the weakling in front of him wasn't falling, observing Raul, who was panting from exhaustion. The man attacked him continuously, but he managed to block each of the attacks. He did his best to avoid getting hit by the man's strikes, and the man grew increasingly frustrated that none of his attacks connected. In a fit of anger, the man launched a powerful attack, shouting at him to go down. He quickly slid backward to create some distance between them, leaving the onlookers and the audience horrified. Someone from the audience shouted that Raul had endured the man's attacks multiple times and asked how much more he could take. Another voice chimed in, noting that Raul had held out for quite a while, and someone encouraged Raul, saying he had their support, which only angered the man further. The man swung his sword furiously at Raul, calling him a rat and tell him that he can't run away forever, but he parried the man's attack. The man swings back his sword, but Raul parried it again while the man asks him if he's not ashamed as a member of a count's family. Raul blocks the man's strikes with his own sword while teasingly remarking that he couldn't hear the man very well. He blocked another one of the man's attacks and then slid backward, creating distance between them. With his sword aimed at the man, Raul prepared for the next move. One of the spectators addressed the man as Edmund, urging him to finish Raul because the match had gone on long enough, and he had wagered his salary on Edmund. Edmund became more serious and declared that he was done playing around. He unleashed his power, forming a mana sword, and warned Raul that he was going to end it. The audience gasped in shock at the sight of the mana sword and warned Raul that he had to dodge it, as getting hit would mean certain defeat. Edmund swung his water-powered skill toward Raul, instructing him to die, but to his surprise, Raul remained standing. Edmund wondered why Raul isn't dodging the attack. Then, Edmund attacked Raul, creating a loud explosion erupted in the center of the arena, leaving the audience stunned. As the smoke slowly dissipated, the referee stood in the center, stopping them. The referee announced to everyone that the match was over and Raul was the winner. Half of the audience cheered for Raul, while the other half couldn't believe that he had won. Edmund tossed his sword aside and walked toward Raul, expressing disbelief and questioning how Raul could be the winner. Edmund was about to explain that if the match hadn't been stopped, he would have won, but the referee interrupted him, calling him foolish and pointing out that if the match had continued, Edmund would be dead by now. Edmund realized that Raul had not been standing still but had been aiming for his neck. In fear, Edmund collapsed to the ground, and Raul approached him, mentioning that they would need to have a discussion about his disrespect toward the county after the tournament. Later, when he arrived at their castle, Anna respectfully told him to rest well. However, as soon as he heard the door shut behind him, he couldn't contain his excitement and shouted in happiness because he had actually won. He opened his status with a smile, and the system showed him an update. The level of Ashton's swordsmanship mastery had increased to beginner level 9. Proudly, he thought to himself that his plan had worked. Utilizing the game's feature where he gained more experience points and mastery by battling stronger opponents, he understood that fighting against a stronger opponent for a longer duration would yield more experience points. He clenched his fist, acknowledging that his plan had succeeded because his game mode granted him an experience multiplier for removing the revive option, known as hardcore mode with high risk and high return. He examined his status, realizing that he had complained but now saw that he was currently level 19 hardcore, with classes in sword and psychokinetic. His affiliation was Ashton County, and his title was Ashton County's youngest son. His attributes were as follows: Strength 22, Agility 25, Stamina 19, Intelligence 15, Willpower 34, Mana 29, Spiritual Power 35, and Senses 30. He possessed unique traits such as Psychokinetic Meister S+, Royal Lineage A, and other unknown traits. He acknowledged that he wouldn't have been able to level up that much in a month if he had been in normal mode. But most importantly, he had 5 unique traits. He understood that Psychokinetic Meister was a trait that Bae DoHyun had, and Royal Lineage was a trait that Raul possessed. He anticipated that the rest of his traits would unlock as he continued to level up. He decided to test these traits in his upcoming tournament matches. The tournament days arrived, and he won every match fairly and cleanly. The audience couldn't believe that the youngest son of Ashton had made it to the grand finale, wondering how it could be possible. Some speculated that he might be lucky or using some kind of trick, but he knows that early-stage Connect civilians were unaware of the player's powers. Upon returning to their castle, he contemplated keeping his ability to use psychokinesis a secret until the players showed up. He confidently believed that he could conceal it with his acting skills. However, someone knocked on his door, introducing himself as Ivan. He invited Ivan inside, and Ivan expressed concern about his well-being, asking if he was injured. He assured Ivan that he was perfectly fine, mentioning the presence of a priest and healer on standby. Ivan placed a hand on his shoulder, advising him not to let his guard down and reminding him that there were wounds that couldn't be healed. He acknowledged Ivan's genuine worry but noted that he wasn't accustomed to such feelings in his past life. He then asked Ivan about the matter he had inquired about. Ivan handed him a document, confirming that he had fulfilled his request. Ivan inquired if he was sure about it and was about to mention Dion. But he interrupted Ivan, telling him not to worry because he was confident he would win. Ivan respectfully bowed to him, expressing his trust, and then left the room. Ivan walked away, reflecting that Raul's confidence resembled Melvin's when he was younger. However, he knew that the final opponent would be Dion, who brutally wounded his opponents. Meanwhile, he examined the document, contemplating its value as it was related to Ashton County's betting system, which supported participants in the tournament. Placing the document on the table, he believed that it was enough to secure his place in the family, and all that remained was to defeat Dion. The host's voice echoed, announcing the beginning of the final match. He faces Dion and the audience. Half cheered for him, telling him to win with his skills, and he got it. But the other half tells him to be ready to get shit on by Dion. Dion calls him a weakling and tells him that he doesn't know how he made it that far, but he'll make sure that he considers it his worst decision to come up there. Dion also tells him that with people cheering, he will soon find out how worthless he is, and it'll be a nice view when he starts crawling with his limbs cut off. But he just yawns in response and asks Dion if he is done stretching his tongue. Raul clenched his fist in anger and released a powerful violet aura while calling him an arrogant fucker, making the audience shout that it was overwhelming mana, and that Raul is no match for Dion. But he thinks Dion is acting all tough because he saw that Dion's level is 42 with the class of Expert Knight, which is a sword user. His affiliation is Austin Viscounty. His title is Ashton Viscounty's Star and Sword Genius. Dion's stats are Potential Talent Grade B, Strength 52, Agility 41, Stamina 43, Intelligence 18, Willpower 14, Mana 32, and Senses 21, making him think that Dion's potential talent is only B, and Dion may look impressive now, but it was Dion's limit. The host shouted that the match had begun, and Dion angrily told him that he'd kill him, calling him a coward. But he just jumped toward Dion and appeared above Dion, making Dion surprised. Then he swung his sword down to attack Dion, but Dion blocked it. They both tried their hardest not to let their swords down first, but then he forcefully swung it down, making Dion slide back to avoid it. Dion angrily tells him that he is showing off, but he just keeps quiet, thinking that Dion's elasticity is below his expectations. They attack each other and block each other continuously, making him notice that Dion's strength is whatever. Dion angrily swung his sword toward him, but he dodged it in time, making Dion ask him why he hadn't hit him. He blocks Dion's sword, realizing that he can see Dion's sword clearly. Then he trips Dion using his feet, making Dion fall to the ground face first while he is busy thinking that a sword skill without any practical experience is called a generic nobleman's sword. He knows that Raul was bullied by that Dion, while Dion asks him if he tripped him and releases his powerful aura again, telling him that he'll fucking kill him. But he calmly swings his body to the left, wondering if the only thing Dion knows is a mana sword with all that mana flowing through his body. The audience is shocked to see that he simply disarmed Dion's sword. Then he aimed his sword at Dion while releasing his blue and black aura and tells Dion that it was boring. He also tells Dion that he is really nothing after all, which makes Dion fume in anger and run toward him to attack. But he simply walks to the side and trips Dion once again, while telling him that he has anger issues and repeatedly falls for the same trick. Dion rolled around on the ground while he was calmly telling Dion to look at himself, and he was ashamed of County Austin's name. Dion once again ran toward him to attack, but he just powerfully punched Dion's face. Dion slowly fell and collapsed on the ground, making the audience unable to believe that Dion was down. Just like that, by Raul. He tells the referee that the opponent is down and asks if he is going to continue the match. The referee shouts to everyone that the winner of the Ashton Coming of Age tournament was Raul Ashton. Then the audience begins to shout to him that they believed in him and continuously shouted his name in celebration. He stumbled while thinking that he was happy he won, but he has awful stamina, making his people worried about him and immediately call a healer. Suddenly, the system popped up in front of him, showing him that the Coming of Age tournament quest had been completed and his rewards were experience points, 300 coins, and a random skill book, which is grade E or lower. Also, his extra rewards are experience points, 5 grade D stat points, and a random skill book, which is grade D or lower. The healers began to heal him while he was busy thinking that now he can make it to the Kingdom Academy. Ivan told Melvin that he was so proud of their young master and that Raul had grown that much in a month. But Melvin just kept quiet, noticing that Raul had played around with Dion. And if Raul really got that far in a month, Raul was a genius. But then Melvin's thoughts were interrupted when Raul saw him. He called his father and waved hi to his father, thinking that Melvin was watching and Melvin probably knew that he was good enough to go to the academy now. But Melvin just silently looked at him, Later, in the castle, Melvin tells him that he can't allow it, making him surprised and asking why. Then he tells Melvin that he thought he could go as long as he made it to the semi-finals, but Melvin tells him that it was situational and from what he saw, he needed to stay by his side longer. Melvin also tells him that he fell after the match, so he should stay there a little longer, but he continues by telling his father that he learned about the sword as a lifelong journey. Then he asks his father if he doesn't always say it. Then he confidently tells Melvin that he is trying to go to the academy to learn more, just like he said, so he can't stop him, making Melvin stunned in surprise. But then Melvin smiles, realizing that Raul has really grown. Then Melvin stands up while telling him, okay, if you really want to go, you'll have to get past me. Then Melvin released his strong aura while aiming his sword at him and telling him that he won't go easy on him. Then he asks him, what are you going to do now? A month later, a lot of knights were behind the carriage and inside the carriage. He was glad that he was finally out. Then he remembered that when his father stopped him, he accepted it and confidently told his father that it was his choice. He charged at Melvin, but Melvin teasingly asked him if it was all he had. Then Melvin swung his sword away and released a more powerful aura while telling him that he'll show him a real sword skill. He then passed out from Melvin's strike. Melvin told him that it was just a sneak peek of what he had, but he knew that it was definitely Melvin's full strength. Then he remembered that Melvin's powerful 5th county lord died by the time the world of Connect started, and after that, the county fell quickly. So, in order to stop the fall, his father had to stay alive, and he would have to meet Melvin's expectations since he left him to leave. He swore that he would get stronger and protect his family because he couldn't lose it all. On the other hand, in the castle, Melvin was looking at him leaving and calling his name, remembering that in the training ground, he asked Raul how many times he had tried and told him to give up. But Raul replied that he'll never give up. He smiled while telling Raul that he'll compliment his persistence because it was worthy of the Ashton family's dignity. Raul raised his sword and ran toward him while he was telling Raul to strike him, but as he was about to block it, he noticed that the trajectory of Raul's sword changed midway, making him get hit a little in the face. Raul was frustrated that he could only leave a small wound even with psychokinesis, but then Melvin smilingly told Raul that he guessed it was about time to admit that Raul was no longer a kid, and that Raul was a proud swordsman, so he told Raul to go and witness the world. Later, they stopped in the forest to rest, and he asked Philip how far they were from the destination. Philip, who was 42 years old at level 92 with a class of High Knights and affiliations with Ashton County and the Golden Bear Order, with the title of Sword Breaker and potential talent grade S, Strength 82, Agility 76, Stamina 81, Intelligence 68, Willpower 77, Mana 76, and Senses 73, as well as unique traits including the strength of an ogre, skilled commander, and sword obsession, replied that at that speed, they would make it in 5 days and asked him if they should move faster. He replied that they needed to train the soldiers as well, so they should keep going at that speed, to which Philip replied that he understood. He thought that including him and his servants, his family had selected a total of 50 people. Of those, there were 3 regular knights, including Philip, 6 trainee knights, 15 trainees, and 20 cavalry. Also, all of them had grade B or higher potential talent. He knew that the number and skill levels weren't bad, and in order to stop the fall, they had to get stronger. A man named Jake told him that the maintenance for the carriage was done and they could get going whenever, to which he praised Jake for his good work. Jake asked them if they needed to bring that many people to that place for a month, but Philip told Jake to stop questioning their young master's order. Then he told Jake that he would know when they got there, leaving Jake more confused. But he knew the reason he was taking them to the free city, Mera, was because it was one of the first cities that players go to after finishing the tutorial. That city had many quests, hidden items, and mana usage limitations to prevent the unreasonable massacre of beginner players. Most of all, the resources were infinite, so the players went crazy about that place. God's Domain was a place full of monsters for players to grind. And God's Domain was the reason why Raul brought everyone to that city. He brought the knights to the grinding zone to level them up faster. He thought it was a perfect plan when the system popped up, showing him that the system had been updated. A new feature, Connect Community, had been unlocked, a new category, Guild, had been unlocked, and a new quest starting line, Adventure, and Skill Collector had been registered, amazing him because a new quest appeared as soon as he entered Mira. He thought he wouldn't be able to use any other features until the official launch, but he guessed maybe he could unlock more features if he met the requirements. Someone knocked on his carriage door, and Jake told him that he could meet the mayor right now. Then he was asked what he would like to do, and he replied that, of course, he'd meet the mayor. Meanwhile, in the main castle, the mayor of the free city, Mira, Reynaldo, asked who was there, and his butler replied that the youngest son of County Ashton, Raul Ashton, had come to visit with 50 of his people. Reynaldo asked his butler if he meant the third son, who was known for being weak, and asked what Raul was there for, suggesting it might be for the fresh air. Then he ordered his butler to let them in because Raul's family made good money off monster materials, and he'd extract some money from Raul. The butler replied that he understood. A moment later, someone opened the door and he gracefully greeted Reynaldo. Reynaldo warmly welcomed him and told him that he sincerely welcomed him to the free city, Mira. He shook Reynaldo's hand while thanking him, and Reynaldo told him to sit over there and talk. However, he thought Reynaldo was insincere and noticed an obvious fake smile on his face. Reynaldo asked him what had brought him to Mira, and he replied that he had heard there was an excellent place to train there. Reynaldo told him that, of course, there was, and he had come to the perfect place because Mira was the safest place to train. But he told Reynaldo that it couldn't be an ordinary place, and he would like to be permitted to enter the cursed forest, which shocked Reynaldo. Reynaldo told him that it was too dangerous, especially for a weakling, but then clarified that he meant it was for younger people. He replied that it was as he expected, and he guessed he had no choice but to throw away the 500,000 gold that he was going to give Reynaldo as a gratuity in the river, which left Reynaldo even more shocked to see 500,000 gold in front of him. Reynaldo immediately grabbed the bag of gold in his hand and told him that he was joking, explaining that the cursed forest would indeed be easy for him and his knights. He would give him permission to enter the forest. He smiled and told Reynaldo that he knew a generous mayor like him would permit them. He knew that the only thing left for him to do was grind and take all the rewards, so he'd be at the top of Connect soon. The knight arrived at the free city, Mira, and he was walking in the street with Jake and Philip. He was thinking that Mira was a place built for Connect players to live in, but there were no players there since it was a closed beta, except for him, Raul Ashton, and because of it, the city was going through a crisis. He knew that there were many accommodations, large stores, larger guild buildings, and other facilities that were disproportionate to the number of people living there, and the land prices dropped because of all of it. But his real purpose for coming there was real estate. He thought that if he took over cheap lands in Mira, sooner or later they'd be used to build luxury houses for nobles, guild houses for players, and apartments for normal players to live in. Also, in the future, those lands would cost more than 100 times what they are now. He also knew that once the players came in and war broke out as it did in the past that he remembered, Mira, the city blessed by the gods, would become a perfect shelter. He remembered that in the past, they could make money by just lending land. But he thought it was still not enough because considering the upcoming war and potential risks, he had to be even more prepared. Then he told the powerful major guilds that he couldn't do anything against their financial prowess in his past life, but this time would be different. Later, Jake, sweating, asked him if he just had to sign right there and called his name while he was looking at Jake pissed. Then he angrily told Jake that everyone had signed except him and ordered him to just sign it, but Jake told him that his mother told him to be careful when signing papers. In the end, the lady put the documents together and told them that including him, a total of 51 had registered for the guild first. He thought that he had created the first guild in a world without players and the very first and most advanced guild. He looked at his people, knowing that they would get assistance from the system as members of the guild, and he was excited to see the confused look on their faces, while Jake was on the side, thinking that his mother was going to kill him. Later, in the Battle Association Mira branch office, he shouted that he was next. The lady welcomed him and asked how she could help him. He replied that he was there to see some skill books and asked the lady what the highest rank they had was. A skill book is a book with different skills written in them, and if they read carefully, they can learn the skill. The skills rank from F to S. The lady replied that their branch office offered up to rank C skill books, but rank C skill books could only be purchased by VIP customers. He asked the lady what the requirements were to be a VIP, and she replied that it could be achieved either through contributions to the association through quests or by making significant purchases. However, for stacking up purchases, he'd have to spend a lot. He asked the lady how much it was, and she replied that it was 10,000 gold. He placed the bag of gold on the table while telling the lady that it was not much and asked if he could see the D rank ones first. The lady happily asked him which line of skill books he would like to see first, whether it was sword, bow, magic, or shield. He smiled and replied that he wanted to see all of them. Later, Jake panted and said that it was too heavy, asking him if they really needed all those books, as they were all holding a swarm of books. He replied that he might think it was a bother now, but those books would advance them to a higher level. Jake told him that he guessed they were well-descriptive skill books, but asked him if they couldn't only train through books at the beginner level. Philip agreed with Jake, saying they could have bought power armor with the money spent on those books, but he assured them not to worry and to be patient, as they would know tomorrow. A moment later, he arrived at his apartment room and looked at the swarm of books in front of him, realizing that maybe it was too much. He knew that there were limits on the number of skills players could use. So normally, players couldn't use various skills. Then he opened his quest window, remembering that when he woke up in Raul's body, there were 2 unknown items in the inventory, making him wonder what those items were. He had tried to open them, but he couldn't click on them or use them. However, yesterday, when he got the quest, he was finally able to use those items. He opened his inventory and found out that one of them was the sealed skill dex, making him guess that maybe the reward for that quest was the activation of the skill dex. Looking at the system, he saw that the quest collector had an unknown grade and a description telling him to collect at least 10 skill books and register them in the skill dex, with extra rewards depending on the type of skill books. His reward for completing it was skill dex activation, and his extra reward was unlocking traits and acquiring skills. He immediately grabbed some of the books, realizing that he had to open the dex and hold the skill book. Then he saw the register, and the dex book began to move on its own, surprising him. A strong purple light came out of it and flew directly into the other book. Words came out of the dex book, making him let go of the other book he was holding, unable to believe that it worked. Then he noticed that the sliver of mana in the book was gone, and it was going to take forever to do them all, wondering if there was a way to register them all at once. Suddenly, the books flew up in mid-air, shocking him. A strong purple light once again came out of the dex book and flew toward the books in mid-air. Then the books began to fall on the ground when it was done. He flipped the dex book's pages, wondering if it understood what he said, and couldn't believe that it actually worked. The system showed him that he had completed the quest, so his skill dex, which was rare, had been activated. For his extra reward, his trait skill collector, which was X, had been unlocked, and copycats, which were S, had been acquired. He clicked the skill collector and saw that its effect was to activate the skill dex, while the skill copycat slightly increased the chance of acquiring skills from the skill book. He then clicked on copycat and saw that its mastery was at beginner level 3. Its effect was to steal skills from the examined opponent, with examined skills being registered in the dex. As mastery went up, he could acquire higher ranked skills, and the power of the skill increased. He thought it was overpowered because he could steal and use someone else's skill. Then the system showed him that the skill dex was of a rare grade, and its status was upgradable and bounded. Its description stated that it was a replica of the mythic item skill dex that held records of ancient skills. These records would reset when crossing dimensions, and the dex would regain its true power after achieving special requirements. Currently, it recorded 525 skills. He knew it was the mythical item he had received right before he died. Some parts of his past life, like his psychokinesis trait and items, came with him, but his skills were reset, and this was a replica too. He also noticed that the only thing left in his inventory unknown was the 3 grade X traits and 1 item, making him wonder what kind of power it held. The next day, the knights were shocked to see the system and panically asked what the status window was and what the thing called guild chat was. They shouted that they needed to go see a priest. On the other hand, the butler welcomed him, and he stared at the butler with his sleepy eyes. He couldn't sleep all night because he was reading through the skill dex. He greeted Bernard and asked if he had explained it to them, to which Bernard replied that he had explained as instructed. He excitedly asked Bernard about the skill book and if he had tried it, to which Bernard nodded in agreement. He knew that Bernard was a servant of the Ashton family and Ivan's stepson. Bernard had been working for the county from a young age and was taught by Ivan himself. Bernard had a great memory and got things done quickly, but there was another reason why he had chosen Bernard. Then Bernard released wind from his hand, making him exclaim that it was amazing. He told Bernard that he knew he could do it, realizing that Bernard had the power to control the wind. Bernard gracefully replied that he was flattered. The system showed him that Bernard was 27 years old, at level 21, with classes in Servant, Beginner, and Windwalker. Bernard's affiliations were Ashton County and the First Guild. His talents included administration, management, and wind power. His potential talent was grade A, with stats including 17 for strength, 18 for agility, 24 for stamina, 53 for intelligence, 46 for willpower, 23 for spiritual power, and 41 for senses. His unique traits were sharp manager, cold-headed, and like the wind. He knew that Bernard might lack in certain stats, but he had great talent for being a servant or in a spur. He was done with his preparations, so he told Bernard to get ready. Bernard confusedly asked him for what, and he replied that they were leaving as soon as the knights were used to it, heading to God's domain, the Cursed Forest. Later, in the cursed forest, an ogre launched its axe to attack him, and it broke the ground in the process. However, he dodged it and told the ogre that it was too slow. Then he launched his fist, but before his fist hit the ogre's head, it exploded. He got down on the ground at the same time the ogre's body collapsed and told the others to come out already. Then a swarm of ogres came out from hiding and shouted that he was a strong human and they should kill him. The leader of the ogres called everyone and ordered them to charge, which the ogres did, running toward him to attack at the same time. But he just positioned himself and told them to bring it on. The cursed forest, God's domain, and, to be specific, God's domain isn't just a grinding zone. It stands for the entire city of Mira because if players get hurt, they get healed, and if players die, they revive in that blessed city, which is why that city is the best shelter. Also, in the forest, the blessing only applies to monsters, so the number of monsters stays the same even after they are killed. Humans can't be revived in the cursed forest and can't walk outside the forest with the items they get from hunting monsters because if they take them outside, the items turn into ashes and disappear. This means that they are not supposed to touch the property of the gods. However, it only applies to civilians. Players can take items they get from monsters outside the forest with the system's assistance. Philip asks Jake why he is talking when their young master is the one fighting them all. On the other hand, he was busy fighting the ogres, and when the leader was the only one left, it asks him what is that power. But he just raises the weapons on the ground with his power and asks the leader if it meant that power. The leader was shocked to see the weapons flying straight to him, and the leader got cut into pieces by them. Then he tells it that it was called psychokinesis, together with Jake. Jake tells him that it is a convenient ability, but Philip tells Jake to stop talking and keep skinning the ogres. Jake sighed and said that he didn't come all the way to Mira to do that, and explained that he guessed they had made good progress from that training. Jake calls him while he is busy collecting the blood of the ogres, and he laughingly thanks them and tells them that it was possible because of everyone's help. All of them could get stronger by studying the skill books, to which Philip thinks that Raul was right and remembers that he was swinging his dagger forward and used the Hanjutsuzen skill to attack the ogre, making the ogre cut in half. Raul asked him how is it and explained to him that it was why he brought skill books instead of power armor, to which he replied that it was amazing. Philip knows that he learned a skill so quickly and wonders how Raul found out about that strange ability. But then the system showed him the guild chat, and he was surprised to read a chat from someone. Then he immediately tells Raul to look at the guild chat, but when he looks at Raul, he fumes in anger while telling him that he saw it too and they are going back to Mira now. Meanwhile, in Mira, at their apartment, someone pointed a sword at one of Raul's men and said that he should have done it earlier. Then the man stabbed Raul's man with the sword, saying that it was hard holding himself back after seeing Ashton's kids walking around. Another man, holding a bloody sword, called the man's brother, telling him that they should have listened to him earlier, then they could have done it way sooner while stabbing another of Raul's men. One of Raul's men asked the men why they were doing it, but another man just slashed Raul's man with the sword while asking his brother if their great-grandfather didn't tell them to be mindful, and reminded them that they were all there because they had made a scene. The man named Ramon was Randall Visconti's first son. The man named Jerry was Randall Visconti's second son, and the man named Cale was Randall Visconti's third son. Raul's man, who was on the ground, told Ramon that they would regret it. But before the man could finish his words, Ramon stabbed him and pulled out the sword immediately, making the man shout in pain. Ramon continuously stabbed the man while laughing, telling him to tell Raul to hurry up because they also had some business with their young master. Then Ramon said that it was strange that they kept reviving while looking at the man who was healing on the ground and calling them bastards. Jerry laughingly told his brothers that they should take care of that Raul kid like that. But Cale told Jerry that he thought noble families weren't supposed to point swords at each other in the Free City. Ramon just asked Cale what was the matter when they could just say they never did it and what were they going to do about it. Ramon also told his brothers that if they thought about it, it was good, and they could just crush the Ashton family. Then Ramon excitedly turned to his brothers, saying that maybe their great-grandfather would even compliment them. However, as Ashton's head exploded into pieces, Cale called his brothers in shock. They looked back and saw Raul asking them how dare they, and telling them that it was an offense towards Ashton County, so they would have to pay back with more than just worthless deaths. The brothers looked at him in surprise, and Jerry asked him if he was crazy and how dare he touch a son of the Randall family. Then Cale asked what the knights were doing and how Raul even got there. One of the knights, who had a sword pointed at his neck, fearfully replied that they thought they were the Ashton family's main force, while Philip and Jake pointed their swords at them. Philip reported to him that they had surrounded the Randall Knights as he ordered and made sure there were no civilians nearby. Bernard and Jake stood silently, looking at the enemy. He praised them for their good work and used his psychokinesis to grab his injured men from the ground and slowly lifted them up in mid-air. Then he ordered Bernard to take them to the shrine, to which Bernard respectfully agreed. He then opened his inventory and pulled out his sword, telling them that he would clean up the garbage himself. He knew that Randall Viscounty was similar to Ashton County. They were one of the 5 warrior families of the Reuben Kingdom. However, unlike the Ashton family, the Randall family didn't have a long history, and the 4 warrior families were reorganized into the 5 warrior families when the current lord of the family, Viscount Hudson D. Randall, reached the Swordmaster stage. As a family with a short history, they had to figure out various ways to ensure their place. They consistently produced great knights, made respectable contributions, and crushed their opponents. The opponent they had targeted was the Ashton County, which had lost its power since it hadn't produced a Swordmaster in a long time. There were no risks in agitating them since the Ashton family was the least politically inclined. Many conflicts between these 2 families across the kingdom were mostly started by the Randall family, and everyone expected Randall Viscounty to win, given their numerous sword masters. So, the people of Randall thought the same would happen here. Jerry, who was looking at him, wondered about that unusual strength and noticed that he had pulled a sword out of the air. The knight behind him, who had a sword pointed at him by Philip, looked at him and slowly grabbed the sword. However, he felt it in time and turned around, swinging his sword and hitting the knight, making the knight shout in pain. The Randall knights were shocked to see it, and Jake put his sword back in the sheath, saying that their young master said he would take care of them himself and ordered his men to put down their swords. One of Randall's strong knights noticed that they were really putting away their swords and wondered if they were insane because he thought it was better for them. Cale furiously ran toward him, asking if he was going to fight them by himself, and swung his huge mace backward to gain force. He told him that it wasn't training, but then a sharp sword slash flew toward Cale, and Cale got cut in half before he could attack, making Cale shout in pain, and Jerry called Cale's name in worry. Jerry called their knights bastards and asked them why they were just standing there. The leader made a frustrated sound and slowly pulled his sword, saying that he guessed he had to act. He explained that he had hesitated because he didn't want to bully a 15-year-old kid, but when his comrades were going down, it wasn't right. The system displayed the man's name as Jeremy, a 37-year-old man, level 65 with the class of Leader of Guard Knights and Beginner Sword Expert. His affiliations were Randall Viscounty and Randall Knights. His potential talent was Grade B, his strength was 66, his agility was 72, his stamina was 68, his intelligence was 48, his willpower was 63, his mana was 70, his senses were 55, and his unique trait was brutality, graded as C. Then the other knights also raised their swords at him. He knew that Jeremy was the Randall family's main weapon, called the rapier, and he guessed that the men were the elites. Jeremy and the knights were aiming their swords at him. He knew that Jeremy's level was 65, and the other elites were each at level 60. However, his current level was 45, so he couldn't win against them normally. One of the knights asked him why he didn't stop now because he thought he had done enough. The other knight told him that they had let him be, but no more. He didn't care even if he was a young master, but he suddenly appeared in front of the knight, surprising him. He then slashed the knight's body, tightly grabbing his sword and raising it backward to gain force. He uses his bear aura and attacked them with his bear strike skill. One of the knights asked him what he was doing, but he just slashed the man's stomach, making the man bleed and shout in pain. Then Jeremy jumped toward him, appearing right in front of him to attack, surprising him. However, he managed to block Jeremy's attack in time, getting pushed back because of it. Jeremy asked his man if he was okay, and the man fearfully replied that he was fine. Jeremy couldn't believe that 2 of his elites went down so easily. He remembered that he had heard Raul was weak and didn't know how to wield a sword. Then Jeremy pulled out his other weapon and told him that he was different from the rumors, so he'd have to get serious now. He pointed his sword at Jeremy and told him to bring it on. He looked at Jeremy and noticed that Jeremy was holding a parrying dagger and a rapier, making him wonder if Jeremy was using Randall Viscounty's sword skill called Shooting Star. Jeremy smiled and told him that he liked his bravery and asked if he knew that every wound healed in Mira. Then he told him that he couldn't fight them all alone. However, he just told Jeremy that he thought he was the one confused and bet that he and his knights hadn't even trained since arriving in Mira, making Jeremy surprised and asking how he knew it. He told Jeremy that those soldiers over there, shaking in their boots even after their wounds had healed, were living proof that they were not used to death. Jeremy pointed his weapons toward him, thinking that he didn't just know about combat, but could see through everything, which meant he was a threat. He ordered his man to cover him from the back, and the man told Jeremy to leave it to him. Then Jeremy jumped and launched his sword toward him. He covered himself with his sword, and Jeremy, with his man, continuously attacked him, slashing his face, arm, and every part of his body. The man saw an opening and ran forward to attack him, making Jeremy surprised and shouting to his man to stop. But he swung his sword forward, and the man got cut in half. Jeremy called his man a fool, but he knew there was no time to waste, so he used his Randall sword vision skill and activated the Shooting Star skill, making him surprised for a second. but then he blocked himself with his sword, mentally telling Jeremy to bring it on. Jeremy continuously attacked him with Shooting Star, a powerful skill known for its 1v1 combat prowess. He noticed that he was struggling even with psychokinesis, but he knew he had to keep up, wondering how when he was definitely dominating that fight. He planned to press Jeremy all the way back, glaring at Jeremy, making Jeremy pissed and shouting, asking him what was up with his arrogant eyes. But he just replied, 100%, making Jeremy confusedly ask him what he meant. Then he swung his sword forward, making Jeremy throw his weapons in the air, and Jeremy immediately looked up to see his weapons. He pierced his sword into the ground, and the system showed him that his opponent's skill examination had been 100% completed, and the copycat was ready for use. Then the system showed him to copy the exact moves using the copycat to engrave the skill into the decks. He used his psychokinesis to grab Jeremy's weapons in the air, making Jeremy surprised. Then the weapons flew directly into his hands, while the system showed him to activate the copycat Randall sword skill Shooting Star, grade B. He angrily activated it while pointing the weapons at Jeremy, and the Shooting Star skill attacked Jeremy in return, making Jeremy shockingly ask how he did it, knowing that it was definitely Shooting Star. Jeremy covered the attack with his arms in pain, shouting and asking who had betrayed them, and taught Raul that sword skill while being continuously hit by the Shooting Star skill. Suddenly, he appeared beneath Jeremy and told him that he taught him himself, making Jeremy confusedly ask what he meant. However, he just stabbed Jeremy in the side and pulled it out, making Jeremy kneel on the ground. The system showed him that he had received a rank S bonus called Randall Sword Skill Shooting Star Grade B Mastery, leveling up to Intermediate Level 1. He had successfully engraved Randall Sword Skill Shooting Star, Grade B, into the skill decks. It also told him to equip the skill in the skill deck selection slot to use Randall Sword Skill Shooting Star, Grade B, continuously. He looked at Jeremy, thinking that it was over and that using the rank S skill Copycat was hard since it was overpowered. He knew that Copycat was a skill he learned with the skill decks that copied the opponent's skill, but it could only copy one skill at a time, and he couldn't lose sight of the target once the skill was activated. If he lost sight of the target, the examination rate would reset, which was why he didn't even blink when he was taking Jeremy's attacks. It was also impossible to steal a skill unless it was a one-on-one fight. He opened his display skill, and the system showed him that his default skill slots were 1. Ashton Vision Sword Skill Bear Crush, which was grade A plus at Intermediate Level 2. 2. Psychokinesis, which was grade S at Intermediate Level 2. 3. Ashton Mind Skill, which was grade A at Intermediate Level 1. 4. Copycat, which was grade S at Beginner Level 6, and 5. Basic Meditation, which was grade E at Beginner Level 8. Then his skill deck select slots were Flash and Shield, which were both grade C at Beginner Level 6. Finally, his skill deck's random slot was Iron Fist, grade D at Intermediate Level 1. He was grateful for his skill decks because he could use 3 more skills, and the selection slots allowed him to freely use 2 skills registered in the skill decks. He decided to use it there, but then he heard something by his side, making him look there in confusion. Jerry fearfully asked him who he was and how he used the Randall sword skill. However, he just told Jerry that he was still there because he had forgotten about him. He ordered Philip to kill them every time they revived for an hour, to which Philip respectfully agreed and asked his men if they had heard their young master. He ordered them to kill them, to which his men immediately agreed. Jerry begged Philip for forgiveness and fear, but he just stared at them, thinking that it was blood for blood. Then the enemy screamed in pain while he was thinking that it wasn't Earth or a game, but the reality that had been presented to him. He knew that he had to do everything to not lose it again, even if that meant wading through a pool of blood. He was determined not to lose. On the other hand, Reynaldo, who was watching everything from a distance, wondered what in the world was going on right now. He remembered that according to the plan, when those Randall Viscounty's guys attacked that bastard Raul, he was supposed to get his share after mobilizing the guards to help. However, Raul beat up 15 knights on his own. Suddenly, Raul looked in his direction, making him bend down in panic, and he wondered how Raul found out he was there. Reynaldo also wondered if Raul wasn't just a rich and good-looking pushover. He contemplated if, by any chance, Raul had hidden a swordmaster of the county, because if that were the case, Raul must have figured out all his plans as well. He calmed himself down and thought that he'd have to be friendly with the Ashton County in the future. A few minutes later, he was in his room, thinking that he had overdone it a bit. But those rewards were pretty good. While looking at the system showing him the results for his sudden quest, Rival Family Challenge, he saw that his rescue and punishment were complete. So, he received a reward of experience points, 30,000 coins, and a random B-grade skill book draw ticket. On top of that, he received about 5,000 gold, a space-expanding magic bag capable of holding a carriage's worth of luggage, and a unique grade rapier and main ghost set from those Randall County scoundrels. He grabbed the ticket, remarking that the B-grade skill book draw ticket was especially nice, and wondered if he had received all flunks from the tournament skill book rewards because even thinking about it now was ridiculous. He placed the ticket on the table and expressed that he didn't need something amazing, but at least it should be a mid-tier one this time. Then, he broke the ticket in half while praying that it wasn't a flunk. The ticket released a bright light, and he was surprised to see that he had acquired a skill book called Rivera Spearmanship Grade B, which made him shout in happiness. He knew that spearmanship was a necessary skill in his next destination, the capital, and told himself that his luck was following him. Then he thought that there was only one more important thing he had to do in Miranao, and he had to invest 1 month there for it. But he swore that he would make sure to succeed. A week later, he was in the forest, launching his sword and attacking the ogre in front of him. He wiped his sweat while the system showed him that he had leveled up, reaching level 51. Additionally, he had achieved the level necessary for promotion, so he needed to decide on the possible promotion. Then the system showed him that it confirmed his job as a sword user and as a beginner psychokinetic. Also, his proficiency in job-related skills, including Ashton family hereditary swordsmanship, Randall swordmanship, and psychokinetic, had increased to mid-level 2. He had satisfied the promotion requirements, so his job sword user had changed into sword expert, and his beginner psychokinetic had changed into intermediate psychokinetic. Philip tells him that it's amazing, and Jake tells him that it's awesome because he became a sword expert at 15 years old. He raises his hand in the air, causing the stones on the ground to begin floating. Then he swings his hand forward while shouting, "Go!" and the stones strike the huge tree in front of him, causing it to explode into pieces. Next, he pulls out his sword, leaps forward, and activates his bear strike, hitting the ground with it, causing the ground to shatter into pieces. He looks at the cracked, destroyed ground and asks his men if it should be like this. Philip tells him that it was wonderful, as he expected from their young master, and Jake playfully asks him if he can now do it without them. Then Jake suggests that they should take a breather and relax, but Philip tightly grabs Jake's ear and asks him what he means by relax. He tells Jake that he should think about how much he has to sleep to catch up with Raul. Jake shouts that it was just a joke and laughs, telling Philip that since their young master has worked so hard, he was just